She thought dumping cement would keep us out. Now the police are digging up my backyard. The morning Greg Harrington stepped onto his back patio should have been like any other Tuesday in May. Birds sang in the maple trees that lined his meticulously landscaped yard, and the early sun cast long shadows across his prized in-ground pool, the centerpiece of countless summer barbecues and the reason his home had become the neighborhood gathering spot for the past 5 years. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. At first, Greg thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. The normally crystal blue water of his pool had been replaced by a grotesque gray mass that sat motionless in the morning light. As he moved closer, the horrible reality became clear. Someone had dumped what appeared to be several hundred pounds of quick-setting cement into his $40,000 swimming pool. "What the hell?" Greg whispered, his coffee mug slipping from his fingers and shattering on the flagstone. The cement had already hardened overnight, creating an ugly, uneven surface that rose like some bizarre concrete island from the shallow end and extended nearly to the deep end's diving board. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone to call the police. This wasn't simple vandalism. This was destruction on a scale that left him breathless. Who would do this? And why? Officer Martinez arrived 40 minutes later, whistling low when he saw the damage. 20 years on the force, and I've never seen anything quite like this, he said, snapping photos of the ruined pool. This is personal, Mr. Harrington. Someone wanted to hurt you specifically. Greg ran his hands through his salt and pepper hair. I don't have enemies. I'm an accountant, for God's sake. The most controversial thing I've done recently was suggest we change the community garden's sprinkler schedule. But as Officer Martinez took his statement, Greg's mind raced through possibilities. There was that dispute with the homeowners association about his fence height last summer. The argument with the contractor who installed his outdoor kitchen. The neighbor 2 doors down who complained about his Saturday morning lawn mowing. Then a sickening thought hit him, Rebecca Winters, his ex-girlfriend who had moved out just 3 months ago after their messy breakup. The same Rebecca who had helped design this very backyard, who had cried when they first filled the pool, who had promised during their last explosive fight that he would regret choosing this house over their relationship. Actually, Greg said slowly there might be someone who would want to do this. Before he could elaborate, his phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Just 5 words that made his blood run cold. The pool is just the beginning. Greg looked up from his phone to the disaster that was once his perfect backyard, suddenly aware that this wasn't just about a ruined pool. The cement hadn't just destroyed his swimming spot, it had fractured the drainage system. And now water was beginning to seep across his lawn toward the foundation of his house. The weight of the cement was cracking the pool's structure, and hairline fractures were already visible along the decorative tile border. His entire property, his pride and joy, the investment he'd chosen over his relationship, was literally crumbling before his eyes. And according to that text, whoever did this wasn't finished. "Officer," Greg said, his voice barely audible over the sound of water trickling where it shouldn't. "I think I'm going to need more than a police report to fix this." 3 days after the cement disaster, Greg's backyard resembled a construction zone rather than the suburban oasis he had cultivated for half a decade. Yellow caution tape cordoned off the pool area where 2 contractors in hard hats examined the damage with grim expressions. The lawn, once emerald green and perfectly manicured, had been churned into muddy channels by the overflow from the compromised pool structure. "It's worse than we initially thought," said Marco, the pool specialist Greg had hired at an emergency rate that made his accountant's heart wince. "The cement didn't just sit on top of your liner. Someone knew what they were doing. They mixed it with an accelerant that helped it bond to the pool surface. We can't just chip it away. The entire structure is compromised." Greg nodded numbly, having barely slept since discovering the vandalism. The police investigation had proceeded at a frustratingly slow pace. Officer Martinez had interviewed Rebecca, who had a suspiciously perfect alibi. She'd been at a work conference in Phoenix, with dozens of witnesses and security footage placing her at a hotel during the estimated time of the incident. "How much to fix it?" Greg asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. Marco exchanged looks with the structural engineer beside him. "To be honest, Mr. Harrington, fixing isn't the right word. We're talking about complete removal and replacement. The cement has caused stress fractures in the foundation. The surrounding patio stonework is shifting. And the drainage issues," he gestured to where water still seeps toward the house foundation. "Those will require extensive landscaping work." "Just give me a number," Greg said, his voice hollow. "Preliminary estimate, 70 to 80,000. And that's if we don't find additional damage once we start digging." Greg felt the blood drain from his face. His insurance company had already sent an adjuster who explained with barely concealed skepticism that his homeowner's policy covered acts of vandalism, but the extent of this damage and the targeted nature of it would require a special investigation. In the meantime, Greg was on his own financially. His phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "Check your mailbox." With trembling hands, Greg walked to the front of his house. Inside the mailbox was an envelope containing a single photograph of him and Rebecca, taken 2 years ago at the pool's opening party. Someone had drawn a red X through his face. Back in his kitchen, Greg spread out the evidence he'd collected: the photograph, printouts of the threatening texts, and a list of possible suspects he'd been compiling. Rebecca remained at the top despite her alibi. But there were others. Jason from the HOL, who had threatened illegal action over Greg's fence. Martin Levitt, the contractor Greg had refused to pay in full after shoddy work on his outdoor kitchen. Even his ex-wife Cynthia, who had always resented the bachelor pad he created after their divorce. A knock at the door startled him. It was Diane Wong, his next-door neighbor, holding a casserole dish. "I thought you might need some dinner," she said, her eyes wide as she peered past him at the disaster visible through his back windows. "The whole neighborhood's talking about what happened. Is it true someone poured cement in your pool?" Greg nodded wearily, accepting the food. "Thanks, Diane. It's been a nightmare." "I can't imagine who would do such a thing," she said, lingering in his doorway. "Though, I did see something odd that night. I was up late with my insomnia and I noticed headlights in your driveway around 2 a.m. I assumed it was you coming home late." Greg felt his pulse quicken. "What kind of car?" "A truck, actually. One of those big ones with the extended cab. Dark color, blue or black maybe?" She hesitated. "The thing is, I've seen it before. It parks sometimes down the street, just sitting there for hours." Greg immediately called Officer Martinez with this new information. As he hung up, his phone buzzed again. "You have nice neighbors. Shame what's going to happen to them, too." The threat sent ice through his veins. This wasn't just about destroying his property anymore. Whoever was doing this was escalating, and Greg was terrified to discover what might come next. A week after the cement incident, Greg found himself sitting in Detective Laura Ray's office at the police station. Officer Martinez had escalated the case after the threatening text about Greg's neighbors, and Detective Ray's specialize in cases of criminal harassment. "I've reviewed everything," she said, closing the folder containing the evidence Greg had collected. "The threatening texts, the photograph, your neighbor's statement about the truck. This is clearly targeted harassment with intent to intimidate. We're taking this very seriously." Greg rubbed his eyes, exhausted from sleepless nights spent patrolling his property and jumping at every sound. "I appreciate that, Detective, but I need more than seriousness. I need to know who's doing this and how to make it stop." The damage to his backyard had continued to worsen. What began as hairline cracks in his foundation had expanded, creating a spiderweb pattern across his back wall. The landscapers had discovered that the cement in the pool had been mixed with something that was slowly leaching into the soil, killing his plants. His beautiful yard was dying one section at a time. "We've narrowed down our suspects," Detective Reyes said, sliding photos across her desk. "Your ex-girlfriend, Rebecca Winters, despite her alibi for the night in question, has a history of erratic behavior following breakups. We found a restraining order filed by her previous boyfriend 3 years ago." Greg raised his eyebrows. "She never mentioned that." "Few people volunteer that information on first dates," Reyes said dryly. "However, we're also looking closely at Martin Levitt, the contractor you refused to pay. His business is failing and he's facing 3 other complaints of shoddy workmanship. Plus," she tapped another photo, "he drives a dark blue F-150 truck that matches your neighbor's description." Greg's phone buzzed. Another text. "They'll never catch me, but I can catch you any time." He showed it to the detective, who immediately called a tech specialist into her office. "We need a trace on this now." While they worked, Greg stepped outside to call Marco for an update on his backyard. The news wasn't good. The damage had spread to the retaining wall separating his property from the steep hillside behind it. If that wall failed, half his yard could potentially slide away. When he returned to Detective Ray's office, he found her frowning at her computer screen. "The texts are coming from a burner phone," she explained, "but we got lucky. The last one pinged off a cell tower near Riverdale Shopping Center, and their security cameras cover most of the parking lot." She turned her monitor toward him, showing grainy footage of a figure in a hooded jacket sitting in a parked car, typing on a phone. The timestamp matched the text Greg had just received. "We can't see the face clearly," Reyes said, "but we can see the vehicle. It's a white Toyota Camry, about 5 years old." She paused, watching Greg's reaction carefully. "Does that car sound familiar to you?" Greg felt his mouth go dry. "That's Kelsey's car." "Kelsey, Rebecca's younger sister," Greg explained, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. "She lived with us for 3 months last year while she was between apartments. She worships Rebecca. They're incredibly close." Detective Rees sat forward. "And would Kelsey have any specialized knowledge about cement or construction?" Greg nodded slowly, the horrible truth dawning on him. She works for a construction management firm. She would know exactly what to do to cause maximum damage. He swallowed hard. And she would do anything for her sister. As if confirming his suspicions, his phone buzzed again. Rebecca says, "Hello." Detective Reyes immediately dispatched officers to locate Kelsey, while Greg returned home with a patrol car following for protection. As he pulled into his driveway, he noticed a familiar figure sitting on his front steps, Rebecca herself. "I know what my sister did," she said as he approached cautiously, "and I'm here to make it right." Greg kept his distance, phone in hand, ready to call for help. "Why should I believe you?" Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "Because I just found out yesterday. Kelsey told me she was teaching you a lesson for how you treated me." She shook her head in disbelief. "I never asked for this. Yes, our breakup was awful, and yes, I was hurt that you chose this house over our relationship. But I would never destroy what you love." Before Greg could respond, his phone rang. Detective Reyes with news that would change everything. They found Kelsey, but there was more to the story than anyone had suspected. Much more. "Mr. Harrington, we found Kelsey, but she wasn't alone." Detective Reyes' voice crackled through Greg's phone as he stood facing Rebecca on his front porch. She was with Martin Levitt. They'd been dating for the past 4 months. The revelation hit Greg like a physical blow. "Martin Levitt, my contractor." "The very same," confirmed Reyes. "And there's more. We found evidence in Levitt's garage, bags of cement matching what was used in your pool, along with detailed plans of your property that show the exact locations to target for maximum damage." Greg stared at Rebecca, who looked genuinely shocked. "Did you know about Kelsey and Martin?" he demanded. She shook her head vigorously. "I had no idea. Kelsey never mentioned dating anyone named Martin." Her expression darkened as understanding dawned. "Wait, is this the same contractor you refused to pay? The one who did your outdoor kitchen?" "Yes," Greg confirmed, his mind racing to connect the dots. "I hired him last year, right after you moved in with me. But his work was substandard, and I only paid him half the agreed amount." Rebecca's eyes widened. "Greg, Kelsey met a contractor at a bar about 4 months ago. She said he was charming, and they hit it off right away." She pulled out her phone, scrolling frantically through photos. "Here, this is from her Instagram. She never told me his last name, just called him Marty." Greg looked at the photo and immediately recognized Martin Levitt, his arm around Kelsey at what appeared to be a New Year's Eve party. Detective Rees continued on the phone. "Based on their text messages, we believe Levitt targeted your ex-sister-in-law, specifically because of her connection to you. He manipulated her, using her resentment over your breakup with Rebecca as a way to convince her to help him get revenge." "That's sick," Greg muttered, running a hand through his hair. "It gets worse," Ray said grimly. "We found plans for additional acts of vandalism. They were planning to compromise your home's gas line next week." Greg felt his knees weaken, and he sat down heavily on the porch steps. Rebecca joined him, her face pale. "We've arrested both of them," the detective assured him. "Kelsey is cooperating, claiming Levitt masterminded everything. According to her, he has a history of retaliating against clients who dispute his work. You weren't his first target, just his most ambitious one." After hanging up, Greg and Rebecca sat in stunned silence for several minutes, watching as the sun began to set over the ruined backyard that had once been the pride of the neighborhood. "I'm so sorry," Rebecca finally said. I never imagined Kelsey would do something like this." Greg shook his head. "You didn't know, but now I understand why the damage was so precise, so calculated to cause maximum destruction. Martin knew exactly where to hit to make the entire yard fail." As if to punctuate his words, a loud crack echoed from the backyard. They rushed around the house just in time to witness a horrifying sight. The compromised retaining wall was finally giving way, taking with it a 6-foot section of the back lawn that slumped sickeningly toward the hillside. "Oh my God," Rebecca gasped, instinctively grabbing Greg's arm. Greg stared at the accelerating destruction of everything he had worked so hard to build. The strange thing was, standing there with Rebecca, witnessing his backyard literally falling apart, he felt an odd sense of clarity. "You know what's ironic?" he said quietly. "You always said I cared more about this house than our relationship. And maybe I did. But watching it all collapse like this, it's just stuff. Expensive stuff, but still just things." Rebecca looked at him curiously, her eyes reflecting the golden sunset. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when Detective Rees told me someone was planning to blow up my house, my first thought wasn't about the property. It was about how close I came to losing everything that actually matters." He met her gaze, "including the chance to apologize to you." As another section of the yard crumbled away, Rebecca squeezed his hand. "We can't go back to how things were," she said softly. "Too much has happened." "I know," Greg agreed, "but maybe we can." His words were cut short by the arrival of emergency vehicles, their lights flashing as they pulled up to secure the increasingly dangerous property. The fire marshal approached, ordering them both to evacuate immediately. A structural collapse was accelerating, and the entire hillside was now considered unstable. As they moved to the safety of the street, joining neighbors who had gathered to watch the disaster unfold, Greg's phone buzzed with one final text from Detective Reyes. "Found something else at Levitt's house. Need you to come identify it ASAP. Might explain everything." The police station hummed with activity as Greg and Rebecca followed Detective Reyes down a corridor to the evidence room. It had been 24 hours since they'd evacuated Greg's property, which engineers had now declared structurally compromised. The hillside had continued its slow collapse through the night, taking with it nearly half of what had once been his immaculate backyard. "Insurance adjusters called this morning," Greg told Rebecca as they walked. "They're covering everything. Apparently, criminal conspiracy resulting in property destruction falls under my policy's provisions." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "That's something, at least." Detective Reyes stopped at a metal door, swiping her keycard. "What I'm about to show you explains why Martin Levitt targeted you so specifically, Mr. Harrington. It goes beyond the payment dispute." Inside, she directed them to a table where several items were laid out. Blueprints of Greg's property, containers of industrial-grade cement mixed with a corrosive agent, and a thick folder labeled Harrington/Winters. "We found this in a hidden safe in Levitt's basement," Reyes explained, opening the folder to reveal photographs, dozens of them, of Greg and Rebecca together, along with detailed notes about their daily routines spanning more than a year. "He was stalking us?" Rebecca asked, her voice trembling. "Not exactly," Reyes said. "Look at the dates on these photos. They begin 3 months before you ever hired him as a contractor." Greg frowned, picking up a photograph of himself checking the mail, dated from the previous spring. "I don't understand. How did he even know who I was back then?" Reyes pulled out another document, a printout of an online review Greg had written 2 years earlier for a local construction company. "Avoid Levitt Brothers construction at all costs. Shoddy workmanship nearly resulted in a gas leak that could have been catastrophic. This company should be shut down." "That was Martin's father's company," Reyes explained. "It went bankrupt shortly after a series of negative reviews, including yours. Martin's father committed suicide 6 months later." Greg sank into a chair, stunned. "I had no idea. I was just warning others after they did terrible work on my previous house." "For Martin, you represented everything he hated," Reyes continued. "A successful man with a beautiful home, the embodiment of the clients who destroyed his family. He created his own contracting business under a slightly different name and then deliberately sought you out when you posted online looking for kitchen renovation quotes." Rebecca was paging through Martin's notebook. "It says here he planned this for over a year. He deliberately did poor work on your outdoor kitchen as the first step, knowing you refused to pay." Her voice trailed off as she continued reading. "Oh my God. He introduced Kelsey to me at that charity event last year. He knew she was my sister. He orchestrated their chance meeting." "Classic long con," Reyes confirmed. "He was patient, methodical. After you hired him for the kitchen and then disputed payment, he used that as an opportunity to meet your then-girlfriend's sister, charm her, and gradually manipulate her into helping him execute his revenge. And the cement in the pool was just the beginning," Greg realized, "if you hadn't caught them when you did. We found evidence they were planning to compromise the gas line to your house next week." Reyes nodded grimly. Martin was escalating. This wasn't just vandalism, it was potentially deadly. As they left the police station, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Greg's phone buzzed with a text from his insurance company. They'd approved temporary housing while his property was assessed and repaired, a process that would likely take 6 to 8 months. "So what now?" Rebecca asked quietly as they stood beside her car. Greg looked at her thoughtfully. "Now I find a place to live while they rebuild. Start over." He paused. "The bizarre thing is, I feel oddly free. That house, that yard, they became an obsession. Something I was trying to perfect instead of focusing on what really mattered." Rebecca nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Like us." "Like us," he agreed, "though I think we both need some time." 3 weeks later, Greg stood beside a different pool, this one belonging to the apartment complex where he'd leased a temporary unit. The insurance money would eventually allow him to rebuild, but he'd already decided to sell the property once restored. Too many bad memories were sunk into that hillside. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Dinner tonight? Just as friends."